If you're anything like me, your entire quarantine has likely been taken over by a bunch of block people role-playing with each other, which sounds weird at first, but let's be honest, it's totally awesome. The Dream SMP has a combination of literally everything I love. Minecraft, YouTubers, role-playing, and a lot of theorizing that needs to be done. That's why I created this SMP Theory channel for. I'll be putting out tons of my own theories and character analyses on the SMP, but hopefully people will also comment and we can have discussions about how these theories and different characters connect and just all have a good time together. Not to mention how hard it is to stay caught up on the Dream SMP, so having a bunch of people to hopefully be able to talk about lore and stuff together would be awesome. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, please consider subscribing. I'm super excited to get started on this channel, and your support would be greatly appreciated. Now let's get on with my first Dream SMP theory. This one's all about the in-between. So, the in-between. We've only seen it 2 times for the span of like 5 minutes each, but there's already so much to unpack lore-wise here. In case you're confused, this is the in-between, a place shown twice before at the end of Karl Jacobs' episodes of Tales from the SMP. So if you haven't watched those yet, this theory might not make a whole lot of sense. So I would recommend watching them, not only for the lore, but also because Karl just did like an incredible job and it deserves a ton of attention, so go watch. But anyways, if we're all caught up on knowing about the in-between and knowing this lore, then we can begin to ask ourselves questions about it. Questions in particular that I believe to be the most crucial. Number 1, what is the in-between exactly? Number 2, how does Karl's time traveling even work related to the in-between? Number 3, what do the mysterious books Karl finds in the in-between mean? And number 4, who is the author of the books? Then we can try and draw a conclusion from it and figure out what it all means at the end. So first, let's start off with question number 1. What exactly is the in-between? Now, this is kind of answered for us in the form of books that Karl reads when he ends up there for the first time. He reads a ton of books every time he gets to the in-between, and they have a lot of good information. Here's what this first one said. Quote, "The in-between acts as your gateway for traveling in time. It isn't a dimension you're familiar with, but in some senses it's a home away from home." End quote. Basically, the in-between is like a hub for traveling through time for Karl. It's like if there were tons of different subway cars, all leading to different points in time. You can travel on the cars, but you have to be in the subway station first, the hub for all the subway cars. This isn't the only conclusion we can draw about what the in-between is, though. We can also understand how it works with quotes and events we see happening inside of it. For example, in one of the books Karl reads during his time in the in-between after the Wild West episode, it says, quote, "The castle is dynamic. It is alive, similar to you or me, constantly changing and growing and adapting. This is not a bad thing. If anything, it will help you find a way to stop this harm being done to you." End quote. So we know the in-between castle is alive and always changing and adapting to its surroundings. This seems very odd right now, but I do think that it will somehow come to be very important in the future. How? Well, that's still something we don't really know, but any piece of insight into how this place works is good information, so hopefully we'll understand this a little more later. But the last thing we know about the in-between is that it is still in time. In the latest Tales of the SMP episode, at the time of recording, which is the Wild West episode, Karl walks around the castle to see other Karls, all exactly like him, walking around it too. These seem to be other versions of Karl. These are the Karls of the future and the past who've come to the in-between, all seen in one space, it seems like. This would mean that the in-between doesn't move through time. Instead, it just sits in one spot in time, where every Karl of the past, present, and future gets sent to. That's why he can see all of the other Karls around him. They are all him of different times, coming back to the same place, frozen in time. But knowing that, we can ask ourselves key question number 2. How does Karl's time traveling even work? Again, the books Karl reads in the in-between are very helpful in explaining it more. Here are just some of the quotes from the books he reads thus far that provides a little more insight. Number 1, quote, "You don't get to choose when you time travel or when you return, but you already know that, and that's something that will remain true." End quote. Number 2, quote, "I know that every time you time travel, you lose more and more of understanding of who you are, and this is something that you can absolutely solve in the future." End quote. These two quotes show us a little bit on how Karl's time traveling works. He can't control how or when he time travels, but he also can't control the fact that he's slowly losing himself each time he travels. Now, this is pretty basic information, but it's important, I think, for later. But for now, we're going to move on to question number 3. What do the mysterious books Karl finds mean? Now, here is where we really need to start theorizing more and connecting these puzzle pieces together. One of the biggest things that happened in the Wild West Tales of the SMP episode was Karl finding a hidden book. This book told him to, quote, look under the tree, end quote. Karl reads it and continues on until he finds a super big tree in the main area of the castle. He remembers the book he had and seemingly goes to look under the tree, but he sees another book right next to him. He opens it first, and it reads in all caps, quote, don't stray from the path, end quote, over and over again for 87 straight pages. Right after reading this, Karl doesn't go look under the tree, and he moves on, only for the in-between to drift back into a cinematic and for his dream to end. So he listened to the book. Clearly something odd is going on here. This place isn't all sunshine and rainbows, and it seems that maybe there are 2 different people writing these books. One hiding secret books in hopes Karl finds them, like books under trees and telling him where to look, and one writing the main books that Karl reads, not wanting Karl to uncover these secrets, telling him to not stray from the path that is laid out for him. The more you look at the main books Karl reads, the more sinister they seem to be. For example, throughout Karl's overall time in the in-between, this phrase is repeated 3 times exactly in 3 separate books. Quote, fear not, this is not a place to provoke harm, but a place to feel at ease, end quote. Now, seeing this would feel reassuring, but repeating it 3 times so quickly seems a little too reassuring. Almost like this place is trying to provoke harm, and whoever is writing these books is leading Karl astray, while the person hiding these secret books might be trying to help him. But whoever wrote the original books realized they were trying to reveal the truth to Karl, so they told him not to stray from the path to stop this from happening. Basically, this would mean that the main books Karl reads shouldn't totally be trusted, and we should keep watching for this likely fight between these 2 authors, trying to sway Karl to their side and seeing how long Karl actually doesn't stray from the path before he ends up changing his mind. Now, this obviously brings up the question of who the author, or authors, actually are. Now, the further we go into these questions, the more true theorizing we have to do, and the more we kind of have to reach. So although there's a lot of evidence for what I think, there's a lot of different theories about the authors and the in-between as a whole, so take this all with a grain of salt. That being said, I think the 2 authors are both people we already know, and that we know well. I think Karl is one of the authors, and I think the other author is Dream. Now, I know this might sound crazy, but there's real evidence to back this idea up, okay? First, we can start with the easier one, Karl. We know the in-between is frozen in time, so a future Karl and present Karl can already exist simultaneously. This means that a future Karl could be writing these books to warn present Karl, in hopes he can change the past. If Karl were to learn that the books and path he was following was actually leading him away from the truth, maybe he would try to hide things under trees and in secret areas as a way to warn his past self, and so far it doesn't seem like his attempts are working. Considering we don't really know anything about this second author, Karl seems like our best bet, considering we don't know of any other time travelers, let alone people who would try to save Karl. But again, as we learn more about this potential second author, things could definitely change. As for the main author of the books, we have a lot more information to go on. We can get some interesting clues about them to hopefully lead us to an answer. Here are the 3 biggest clues, I think. Number 1, they know what Karl's going through. The books always seem to talk to Karl in the sense that they've experienced it too, always saying things like, I know, about what Karl's going through and telling him he can solve these issues. The author even says, quote, I know you don't want to lose your friends. I don't want you to either, end quote. And Karl made this very clear. He tweeted this exact quote after the stream along with a bunch of question marks by the author, so seemingly this is an important one. And to me, this seems to mean that the author knows what it's like to lose friends, and doesn't want this to happen to Karl the same way it happened to them. Basically, the author seems to know way too much about Karl and time traveling to not be a time traveler themselves. Clue number 2. The author speaks specifically to Karl. Now, this one's a lot quicker and easier, but the author always addresses Karl directly, so we know that they know him, and they're writing each and every one of these books as a specific message for him and nobody else, so no other time travelers or other people are meant to read these books except for Karl. Clue number 3. The books are written in real time. Now, the books Karl reads always seem to know what just recently happened to him, so whoever's writing these is writing as Karl experiences these things, so they must be watching over him somehow. For example, quote, "You're starting to connect the pieces," end quote, or, quote, "As you are aware, you've been here many times now," end quote. For the first quote, we know that this author seems to see Karl connecting these pieces together, and as for the second one, the author knows that they previously told Karl that he's been here, and he's starting to become aware of that. The author knows what's happened and what Karl's doing and going through, so they have to be watching him somehow. And as for the last clue about being watched, we can pretty confidently say that there is someone watching Karl as he time travels. In the Wild West episode, we get told by Karl that this takes place around the same time as The Masquerade, which was the last tales of the SMP, making it seem like the timeline of events would be significant. As the tale starts, there is a wanted sign outside of the sheriff's office, with a picture of a very familiar face from last episode, Sir Billiam.
I am Sir Billiam III, the owner of this here mansion.
Now, if you remember, Sir Billiam was a billionaire who built a mansion around the egg to protect it, and him and his nameless assistant murdered tons of people under the egg's control, including Karl. In this newer episode, Karl compares the sheriff to Sir Billiam's picture, seemingly convinced that the two were actually the same person. Ranboo even tweeted a picture of both of them next to each other after the stream on his main Twitter, seeming to show that maybe Sir Billiam went into hiding as the sheriff after he apparently stole tons of money from the town, according to the banker Percy, played by Tubbo.
See, we used to have money, but then this one guy on this poster over here, he just took all of it and ran. Have any of you seen this here individual?
He walked into the bank claiming to be an investor.
Yeah.
You've never seen him before?
That's how he gets you. I haven't seen him since he got up and left town.
Roughly 3 months ago.
Now this seems odd. There doesn't really seem to be a good reason for a billionaire to steal a bunch of money from a western town and then pretend to be their sheriff unless something else is going on here. Maybe someone time traveled with Karl and they became Sir Billiam, and maybe they're following Karl around, seeing each story he ends up at, watching him. This would make them very likely to know the things we see that the author knows as he writes about them in the books. We also know this is possible, considering Karl has time traveled and become other people before, like he did in the Lost City of Mizu episode.
We're just fishermen around this area. My name's Isaac. What's your name?
So it would make sense for someone from the current SMP to time travel and become someone from the past. So yeah, it does seem like there is another time traveler writing these books, following Karl around time, and seemingly not wanting him to succeed. Now, who seems like the only person who would want to do that? Yeah, Dream. We know Dream is always one step ahead of everyone, so it would make sense that it's because he can also time travel. He's even said he's always a step ahead himself.
I've been one step ahead of you guys the entire time.
And even his time in prison seems to be weirdly still under his control, like being imprisoned is part of the plan or something. Maybe he learned how to get control over his powers and no longer loses himself, so he can follow Karl around time with ease. Not only that, but he has a motive. Karl would likely try to stop him if he sees too much and learns the truth that it seems Dream already knows, that Dream will eventually incite chaos and likely disaster for the SMP. So Dream would want to try and stop Karl from seeing the future, as Karl would probably be the only one who could genuinely stop Dream. So that's where my main theory for today ends, but I do want to touch on someone who seems to be kind of connected in all of this somehow, because I have a few ideas about Ranboo. Now again, this is very, very far-fetched theorizing, and basically the stuff about Dream seems to be the furthest I can go with decent evidence, so again, just take this as kind of a fun little side theory that I kind of got on Ranboo just because I think it's interesting. So Ranboo has a ton of lore going on for him right now, and I think there's a way to potentially connect his story successfully to tie together not only Dream, Karl, and the Inbetween, but Ranboo's entire character, all with just a nice little perfect bow. So here we go. We know a side effect of time travel is losing yourself and losing memories. The only other person besides Karl going through this kind of thing is Ranboo, who keeps his memory book just like Karl keeps his diaries about the SMP and his travels. It was also recently revealed that Dream can control Ranboo in a sense. He had Sapnap send him a little smiley face, and immediately after seeing this smiley face, Ranboo started enderwalking, which we know helps Dream. So it looks like Dream can control Ranboo, and he knows he's capable of it, but why? Well, this is a big stretch, but here's what I'm proposing. Okay, what if Ranboo's other half is Inbetween? We know he's half Enderman and half mystery, but it would make a lot of sense for Inbetween to be his missing half. It would explain why he's half Enderman and half something else, because he lost half of himself while traveling through time. It would also potentially explain Dream's power over him. If Dream runs this SMP canonically and is capable of time travel, maybe he's capable of controlling the Inbetween to some extent. Maybe that's how the books are always written and in place when Karl travels there. Maybe that means that since Ranboo is half Inbetween, Dream had control over that particular half, and this smile that he sends triggers this Inbetween half, the half he lost to a world Dream controls. This could even provide further motive for Dream to be trying to lead Karl astray. Maybe he wants Karl to lose himself, so he's lying to him until eventually he'll fall under Dream's control, just like Ranboo did. But anyway, that's all I've got for you today, and those are all my theories on the Inbetween based on tales of the SMP that we've gotten so far. Anyways, I hope that you've enjoyed this theory and have hopefully thought a little bit more about the SMP and the Inbetween, and maybe I've provided you with a little bit more thinking to do about all of this. I had a great time writing this theory and trying to connect all of these dots together, and again, I would love to hear your input on what you think about this theory and what you think about Ranboo or the Inbetween or Karl or Dream or the SMP as a whole, since I think it's pretty awesome. Again, I would love if you could like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Again, I'm going to be doing a ton more stuff like this and like character analyses on like Tommy or Dream and like their motives and stuff, which I think would be really interesting. So yeah, let me know what you want to see and let me know if you enjoyed the video too. That would mean a lot, and I will see you in the next theory, and hopefully more lore happens. That's more exciting and we can theorize about it. Alright, anyways, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!